Hi guys, Ashley here. Today I'm bringing you Jerry Clode, who is going to talk about Chinese consumers, the changing preferences after COVID-19, and how China market essentially is responding to this crisis. Jerry, welcome on the show.
Thanks, Ashley. It's great to be here.
You are right now in New Zealand, so the first question is, how's New Zealand?
Well, we've just gone, in a couple of hours, we'll go into 4 weeks of what's called Code 4. So no one can leave their homes. There's about 200 confirmed cases, so we're really moving early on it. And I think the entire country is behind our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
And I love your Prime Minister. This is the only head of state that I follow on all social media accounts. I mean, such an authentic person. Now, moving to China, while the rest of the world is just going into lockdown and Code 4, China has recently basically lifted a lot of bans and closed coronavirus specifically built hospitals. What is your take on what's happening in the market right now, business-wise? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? What is your projection?
In terms of consumer sentiment, I'm very optimistic. But one thing that I think businesses and international brands need to be very careful of is assuming that Chinese consumer behavior will fundamentally change. I think there will be subtle changes in certain areas, but of course, Chinese consumers are very resilient. So this is not the first time that they have faced something like this. They've already gone through SARS. At this point, they're really wanting to celebrate going back to the new normal. So I've seen some reports where they say, oh, okay, Chinese consumers, they've got used to being at home for so long. This is the new normal. That's not correct. They've been shut up in their houses for so long and they're just dying to get out and really enjoy the experiences that they love with their friends, with their partners, with their colleagues. They want to get out there and start enjoying their life again. So for brands that are focused in the what I would define as experience, life experience area, this is an absolutely huge opportunity to start talking in a more optimistic tone. So for example, if I just picked one brand, I would say North Face. North Face have done an incredible job of building the culture of outdoor training in China. This is the time where they really need to take that up another notch. That's what people want. They have Chinese consumers have been in lockdown for so long. It's something that the rest of the world is just starting to deal with. They've gone through that process. So all of a sudden, they've emotionally been released from that reality. And now they can go back to enjoying the things they love. And that is going to be a huge, huge opportunity for major brands and also smaller brands to become more relevant to local lifestyles. So huge opportunity. So to answer your question, I'm extremely optimistic. I'm just saying to international brands, don't assume that Chinese consumers are going to fundamentally change. A few areas in terms of their mindset are going to change subtly or become more intense. Others are going to become more conservative. So it's going to be very, very important for brands to think, how do these changes impact my category? And then how does that impact my positioning?
And what about consumer journeys? Shall basically right now all these brands are sitting in their headquarters, or rather they are being quarantined at home, and they are essentially wondering, okay, while the rest of the world is on lockdown, China is probably my safest bet. They are recovering earliest and soonest, and they are a big market. So shall I basically go and revisit their consumer journey? Has it changed so much that I cannot just take my plan from earlier 2020 and start following that again? Do I need to revise something? Or in your professional opinion, that's okay. They can resume as normal with a bit of caution. What's your take?
I think they need to reset because the realities have changed. Now, a useful exercise is for brand teams to think about certain target consumers that they're focused on. How is a super mum going to be thinking differently after COVID-19? How is a young professional going to be thinking differently? How is a senior going to be thinking differently? There are going to be key priorities that will have changed.
Mm.
And there will be, so just looking at one particular cultural idea, the idea of being a parent, this will have changed quite fundamentally during the lockdown period because, of course, parents are spending so much more time with their children and they're actually starting to notice how their direct parenting is influencing the social development of their children. So, in some senses, this means some areas, particularly around hygiene, will intensify, while some other areas around education may open or become more liberalized. So it's very important for brands to look at those nuanced changes.
I absolutely love it. And because you are focusing on understanding different consumer groups within China, within all these different industries, and you know Chinese consumers so well, what are your favorite consumer groups right now that you are really excited about post coronavirus? Who is going to surprise us? Who is going to basically drive this new normal?
Well, my old favorite, they will remain my favorite, are the super mums. And when I say my favorites are the super mums, it's because I conduct so many interviews with them each year. I do a lot of work with FMCG brands, so milk, dairy, supermarket brands. And over this time, I've met such wonderful women in China, and I'm so impressed with how busy they are. They are the busiest people in the world from 5 a.m. till 1 in the morning. Go, go, go. Now, as I mentioned, I'm really interested to see how their take on family life will have changed. I'm also really interested to see how their relationship with their partner,
Mhm.
Chinese hubbies, how are they changing? Because they cannot have just sat around this whole time. They will have had to actually do something.
They say divorce rates are up, actually.
Divorce rates, tension and lockdown, but for the relationships that actually survive, it, I'm not saying that Chinese husbands are useless. I'm just saying that maybe they didn't do as much, they don't support super mums as much as they should. In a lockdown situation, the division of labor in the home will be very, very clear. And as we've seen on social media, there have been some very emotive examples of Chinese husbands caring for their wives. One in particular about a Chinese nurse in Wuhan, which is particularly touching. So this will actually impact not only super mums, but super dads. Now, my other favorite group are the young ones, so the pre-millennials. Now, everyone is writing off the post-ling-lings, but I love them. Now, why do I love the post-ling-lings? Because I am starting to see them engage in a personal way with sustainability. When
Yeah.
I'm looking closely at their social media discussions, it's not just green lifestyle, it's not broad and fluffy. It's actually about day to day contributions, what they're doing, sustainable fashion, interest in smart cities, interest in their carbon footprint on a daily basis. Now, this is really, really exciting because quite often clients will come to me and they'll say, well, is China actually interested in environment and sustainability? I say, well, yeah, really interested. And if you want to see some of the most progressive views in the world, then you talk to Chinese pre-millennials because that's what they talk about. And it's not just talk, they're out there doing things. Now, that's not just something that is confined to the first tier eastern seaboard cities. You're seeing a lot of this in Sichuan, in Western China. You're also seeing a lot of this in cities such as Xi'an and also in Northern China. Recently, I was doing some ethnographic work and I was amazed at how much young people were talking about sustainability in Xi'an, which sadly is one of the areas of China most affected by airborne pollution. But young people really rolling up their sleeves and thinking, discussing, talking about what they could do on a day-to-day basis. So always like super mums because basically they are the most important consumers in China, as we all know. But I'm really excited about some of the views from pre-millennials, particularly around sustainability and where that will move in China. If I can throw one more in, I really like the post-40s. I was very, very lucky to do some really interesting ethnographic work with an a beer brand last year, where I was exploring the hobbies of post-40s. Now, what has happened in China because of what we could call the corporate rat race, many of the post-40s have dedicated their 20s and their 30s to achieving financial success. Now, they're getting a health they've had a work health check, and they're just saying, okay, I need to look after myself a bit more. So this is the group that are doing marathon training. They're doing yoga at home. They're thinking very carefully once again about how can I be a great parent to my growing children? How can I actually be an active role model? Also, it's really interesting to look at their travel choices. They're actually moving to places where they can do adventure tourism. They travel overseas to run a marathon. It's not just about shopping, shopping, shopping. That whole dynamic has changed for them. So how they're moving, not necessarily with sustainability, but to well-being is really exciting. And of course, as a New Zealander and also Australasia, this is really important in terms of the types of products that we're exporting to China. So, sorry, three groups. I'm generally optimistic, but these three groups I really like and I'm tracking very closely.
Very exciting, very exciting. And I'm also very excited about the older consumers in China that are right now, I think, among all of the consumers are going probably through the biggest revolution of their daily lifestyle and disruption, and reimagining their daily life, because we all know in big cities and even in smaller cities in China, let's say tier 2 to 5, people used to buy, people above 70 used to buy everything from wet markets. Right now, we see that after almost 8 weeks of lockdown, they are shopping with Hema. And a lot of people during the lockdown actually joined platforms like Douyin. And we see more and more elderly bloggers actually starting their channels and participating in, on Douyin, for example, right now they allow longer videos. And essentially, people right now find also some educational posts and educational content on younger platforms. I've also seen older people starting to game, which was always the prerogative of much younger audiences. So I'm excited to see personally how are these people going to change, because they control still quite a significant budget in Chinese household. It's all in their hands. So these are definitely all exciting changes. What do you feel is going to happen with Chinese brands versus foreign brands? Because essentially right now I feel that there are two major line of thoughts. The first one is Chinese brands are going to overtake many Western brands in many positions because they are, first of all, reacting to change faster. They are, don't have problems with logistics. And a lot of the other people say that, okay, Western brands are still going to be preferred choice for the majority of middle-class consumers. What is your take?
Actually, I've seen this sort of go up and down for quite a long period. Now, probably before COVID-19, you were seeing a resurgence of Chinese brands. And you could argue, okay, Chinese brands seem to be getting their shoppers, their consumers better. They seem to be faster. There's, foreign brands are just coming across as a little bit stuffy. Also, the ascendance of what I would describe as favorite legacy brands. So Huawei would be an example where people generally, it's not I'm buying this for patriotic reasons. I generally believe in this brand and I'm very proud about their technological achievements. So generally buying into a deeper brand story. Post-COVID-19, I think it switches back the other way. It's not to say that international brands are going to get any faster. Still, the Chinese brands are going to be closer to their consumers, so particularly in the FMCG space. But some of the key equities around international brands, around safety, around purity, around production standards, I have described this to some of my clients in this part of the world, in New Zealand and Australia. I've said, okay, you lost a lot of ground in the last 5 years. Now the slate has essentially been wiped clean. You have another chance. But you don't need to be faster than Chinese brands, but you need to make a concerted effort to communicate your core equities around purity, around sustainability. But often I find that international brands are very, very clear when they're communicating with their home audience. And then when it comes to China, they tend to take their foot off the pedal and the stories are more generic. It's almost like I am the brand from the mountains in New Zealand. That's enough. But of course, you need to go much further. But the key point is, I think that momentum will switch back to international brands. So international brands that have a foothold in China will, over the next period, be able to gain, I think, regain their momentum. But I think a number of more niche international brands will emerge, particularly in the supermarket and family space. So I think it's, as I mentioned at the start of the call, there's a huge opportunity, but it really requires strong brand storytelling, talking about those equities, imagining your Chinese consumers locked down for such a long period. What are going to be their doubts about brands?
And
It's
how
not
to
the
address
fault.
them. Yeah.
Exactly. It's not the fault of the Chinese, but naturally that's going to be a subtle shift in mindset. So international brands, as China gets back to normal, need to think, how can we more clearly communicate these key equities which are intuitive to our brand?
And a couple of people are saying that actually Chinese consumer might find it very um, unsettling, the thought that while everything is kind of getting back to normal in China, some of these products have been manufactured in places or been shipped from the places, let's say Europe or the US, that have this big outbreak right now. So I actually heard from a few Chinese friends saying that, ooh, you know, buying cross-border brands, not sure, you know, right now they have all that virus ranging and maybe they're going to import some of that stuff back to us. I was like, the virus doesn't really travel by thousands of miles. But what do you think about that sentiment? Do you believe that this is going to be a potential threat that brands need to address, or is it something that we can discount?
No, I honestly think this is going to be short term. So it's really, so when we look at the reported cases in China, now a majority, if not all, are coming from overseas.
Yeah.
And then naturally that creates this, what I would describe as soft xenophobia. So it's sort of like, oh, you know, stay away from me. I don't want you bringing in, re-bringing in coronavirus. Now, I think that's just going to fade away quite quickly because when I think from a perspective of a super mum, they really do so much research on the international brands that they buy. So, for example, many mums will buy specific laundry powder or liquid for their children to deal with their more sensitive skin, which they will buy from France or America or New Zealand. Now, they've done so much research, they realize that that's not going to be something that's going to bring yeah, and we sometimes I think just generally I think sometimes international brand managers or just people doing business in China sometimes get sucked into the cutesiness of Chinese consumers. So they can talk and when they talk, they're very enthusiastic about shopping, but that doesn't mean they're unsophisticated. They're deeply sophisticated because when they're not talking to you, they're doing mountains of research individually, but also with their group of other super mums, and they really know their stuff. So for you to get through, it's still that really tough litmus test. So no, I've been noticing the same things. I think that's just going to be a little blip, and China will finally get to normal. When China gets to normal, then there's going to be a swing back to international brands, or at least an opportunity for them to build momentum.
And this is beautiful. My last question for today would be, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions in general that people around the world in terms of brands and companies have when it comes to Chinese consumers?
I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that because Chinese consumers are deeply influenced by influencers, that means that they are passive. So the
Ah.
Chinese consumers are just follow, 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 follow. But that is a fundamental misunderstanding of Chinese culture.
Mm,
In Western, or I don't know what the West is, in other markets, people use other ways to navigate information about brands.
mm,
Culturally, in China, relying on examples or exemplars of knowledge,
mm,
so someone who knows that area, is actually considered a logical and efficient way to gain reliable information. It doesn't mean that you are following that person. It is simply
blindly.
another thread of information in a very sophisticated decision about shopping, about a brand that you would engage with, be loyal to. So I think sometimes it's almost, well, if we get that message right or we find the right influencer, then that will solve all our marketing problems. But no, that's just a fundamental misreading of the way in which people create relationships with brands. It's quite different. It's not good or bad. It's just culturally different.
So shall people use influencers? And apart from influencers, what shall they also be doing?
Okay, I think use influencers if that suits your brand. Now, I believe one of the most important things to remember is when your brand is moving or has a level of engagement with China, that does not mean that the brand changes its stripes.
Mm,
You need, as a brand, to be entirely consistent in terms of your philosophy, your personality, your character. Now, sometimes that means you need to localize elements of your brand, but that does not mean you have version A for some markets and version B for China, because that's going to be seen as inconsistent. So, the most important thing is for brands to think really carefully in terms of what is our fundamental essence.
mm,
And how do we deliver that in the most relevant way for China? Now, to answer your questions, if you work with an influencer or a celebrity, they may be a very good vehicle to express that essence. For other brands, that's not what they do at home, so there's no reason why they would do it in China. They're more about a retail presence, or they're more about creating a new benchmark in terms of digital shopping. So
mm.
it's important for brands not to kind of do a Jekyll and Hyde when they come to China. Think about that consistency. And also, one of the things to think about with influencers, often, uh, often brand teams consider influencers in China as similar to a brand ambassadorship. So
Mm,
it's the
mm.
idea the influencer is representing our brand. So their
Brand
personality
friend.
and friend. But of course, looking at it, you know, looking at it objectively, the influencer economy in China is simply another channel. So
Mm,
you could use WeChat, you can use e-commerce, you can use traditional, you can also use influencer. You are using the influencer and their network to increase visibility and get your message out to target consumers. Sometimes I think international brands may overthink that, or they may apply a very traditional framework to it and misunderstand it. They overplay it. Influencers do a great job of connecting you with your target consumers. And if they do that, then it's a great way to build momentum.
that's beautiful. Jerry, thank you so much for your time today. It was extremely meaningful. Jerry is helping big multinational companies and smaller local businesses to understand how to approach China consumers, how to build the customer journeys. So do reach out to him for a recommendation, a consultation, and essentially strategy projects. Thank you so much, Jerry, again. We're going to chat again soon. So stay tuned for more Digital China episodes.